Keep this short-ish and sweet. I was thinking about what to do today, and some of my favorite stuff I've already done in History Club. A lot of you may not have been here for it, but that's okay. And I wanted to kind of get down to the crux of what I find important in history. So I decided to put down my top 10 in history. Now, this does not mean that I think all these people are better people than everyone else in history. It is not a list of like the most moral people in history, the most achieved people in history. Sorry, I move around when I
Yes, I know.
Hi, yeah, they're next door. It is just my favorites to talk about. So let's get started.
I'm gonna sit with the donuts.
Unfortunately, my pen doesn't work. So number 1 is actually, or number 10 that is. I'm in reverse order. Number 10 is probably one of the worst people in history, but that's why I love him. Him and one more on this list are some of the worst people in history. Bohemond of Antioch. He's called that because he becomes king of Antioch during the First Crusade. This guy is one of the smartest, biggest jerks in the world. When most people went on the Crusades, they actually were finding legitimately went for religious reasons. Like you had to give up a lot of money and property to be going on the crusade. And most people did not go for financial gain. That does not apply to Bohemond of Antioch. He was a Norman crown prince, but when his father died, he was away from his country, and so his brothers took the crown from him, and so he went on the Crusades just to get lands. This guy lied his way across the Middle East in order to accomplish this. My favorite two parts of this, I'll tell you two. They were traveling with the Byzantine emperor, or Byzantine general, and his men on the way to capture the city of Antioch and areas east in Turkey today. And he kind of wanted the Byzantines to go away because as long as they're there, he's going to have a hard time taking land. So he strikes up a friendship with this general. And one night, they're sitting there talking, and he says, listen, I don't remember the guy's name, so I'm going to call him George. Hey, George, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but the men, they don't like you. And they're plotting to kill you tomorrow night. They're going to assassinate you. So I just want you to know, just from me to you. So the general, what's he going to do? Leave! He takes his men and he leaves and goes back to Constantinople. And Bohemond gets up on top of a rock or maybe a horse surveyed, we don't know. And he says, Crusaders, the Byzantines have abandoned us. They've left us here to die to the Saracens. We must nullify our vows to give them any land we conquest because they have left us here to die. Any land we take is now ours. Yay!
Does ours actually mean his?
Yes. Well, then they get to Antioch. And they didn't have a whole lot of siege weapons, early-ish Middle Ages. And so they're there, they're outside the walls trying to figure out how to get in. And everyone's starting to panic because another army is coming to pin them against the walls. And so Bohemond ends up bribing a guard to open the doors at midnight the next night. And he tells the people, I've had a vision. God has spoken to me. Tomorrow night at midnight, God will open the gates of the city. So he said to me. And the next night the gates open, everyone goes, yay, Bohemond, he did it. Yes, Marge.
So he used religious properties as a political gain.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, it's clever.
Yeah, it's clever.
You read that out there with Boss Tweed.
I wonder if anyone else used that kind of tactic.
Probably nobody. And what's my favorite part of that story is they take Antioch, they're ready to go to Jerusalem to be saved, and he says, someone must stay behind to guard the rear. I know. Whoever does it will not go straight to heaven. They will not be redeemed. I will take that blow and stay behind and not go fight the 1,000 armies waiting for you over there in this impossible journey. And so he stayed behind, became Bohemond of Antioch, king of Antioch. And he has some more exploits and stuff. When his son becomes king, it goes pretty well for him. So one of my favorites in history, just because he's a big jerk. Followed closely by Lucius Cornelius Sulla of Rome. You guys, when you think dictator of Rome, you may think Julius Caesar. Well, Julius Caesar was nothing compared to my man Sulla. Sulla, for probably more selfish reasons than Caesar, he got kind of politically backstabbed, and so Just because of that, he was in the middle of a war in
Are you
Greece.
suggesting Caesar didn't get backstabbed?
I literally
Um,
just said that joke.
That's true.
Great minds.
Politically, not
Thinking like-
physically. Sulla was in the middle of Greece and got betrayed back at Rome, so he just stops the war in Greece and turns his army around and comes back to Rome and takes it over. And the system he puts in place is also genius and very cruel. Most of his enemies were wealthy, so he said, well, let's see. We are having a budget problem right now. Rome's in a lot of debt, so here's what we'll do. I'll just put up a list of names on the wall every day, and people who kill those people and bring me all their property, I'll keep the property and they can have a little bit of money, and we'll solve the debt deficit.
Seems like a great idea.
It worked! Suddenly, Sulla had no enemies, they were all dead, and he solved the budget problem in Rome. Perfect! Now, what I actually like about him is he is probably, I can't say this authoritatively, probably the first openly gay dictator in history. Not while he was leader. While he was leader, in Rome, you're supposed to keep that kind of on the DL. But once he finished and he gave up power peacefully, I might add, and restored the republic temporarily, he actually had his boyfriend move in with him, a guy named Metrobius, and his wife was unhappy about that. But that's how it was, and he partied for the last 2 years of his life before he died of probably liver failure. But
That's how you go out.
And normally, politically, that would have been political suicide. Because in Rome, we talk a lot about how heteronormative culture was different than it is here, but it was still supposed to be just kind of like a fling on the side, don't be too Greek about it, was the idea.
Well,
So
also,
he was
like,
gonna,
you have to be the top. Like, you have to
yeah,
be-
exactly. In this case, though, no one messed with him. He had a boyfriend, and you weren't going to look twice at him because you might get proscribed and killed if you didn't do it, even if he wasn't a dictator anymore. Okay, there's the last two bad, or actually, this is a mixture of bad person. Augustus Caesar, who follows, is probably the greatest Roman emperor and the first. Many others come, and they're all trying to emulate Augustus. Augustus finds Rome what he calls a city of brick and turns it a city of marble. All the amazing buildings you see in Rome today, if you go, are pretty much all made by Augustus Caesar. The Roman Empire's boundaries were solidified in this time, and he is well known for just his political machinations. He totally rechanges art in Rome. I mean, he's a Renaissance man, a lot like Jefferson in a lot of ways, except actually has power. And he rules until his dying day. He lived to be his 80s. So people were born and lived full lives and died all under Augustus, which, if you know anything about Rome, is rare. Normally, you become emperor and 4 days later you die because your Praetorian Guard decides that they would prefer a different emperor. Good. Frederick Douglass is one you guys know. Frederick Douglass, I think he's probably my favorite out of, we look at the civil rights, like the long-term civil rights movement from slavery all the way to the present. He might be my favorite member of it, simply because he was so impressive. To have been born a slave, to move to the North and get so well educated. How many of you have read Frederick Douglass's work in your classes? You should take the time to read it. He basically became the head of civil rights in America simply because he was so impressive. He put to bed any stereotypes that African Americans just could not be as accomplished as white people. They're like, no, take a look at Frederick Douglass. This guy writes better than any of you. So take the time to read his work. I also like for him, he was very honest. It became kind of rote for many people once Lincoln freed the slaves to say, oh, he was just the perfect guy who freed the slaves. Douglass didn't take that approach. He has a quote, I can't remember if I put it here. Yes. He, as a eulogy for Lincoln, and part of it he spoke, he was preeminently the white man's president, entirely devoted to the welfare of white men. He was ready and willing at any time during the first years of his administration to deny, postpone, and sacrifice the rights of humanity in the colored people to promote, I think that might be a voice problem there, to promote the welfare of the white people in this country. He understood that the Emancipation Proclamation was not about black people. It was a political move in order to gain support in the war, in the Civil War, and to make sure Europe didn't come in. He then did not remove his thankfulness for that it happened, because he goes on to say, like, look, he could have done something else. He chose to do this, and we're grateful for that. But let's not forget that even Lincoln is the white man's president, and we need to continue working for our own power. Ida Wells. Mr. Turner disagrees with me on this one. I had a little debate about this one. I believe Ida Wells, coming in the 1930s, was ahead of her time. She, to me, resembles much more the later civil rights movement, but too early. Did you guys hear recently, I believe we had the last survivor of the Tulsa massacre in Oklahoma die? You guys hear about that? You guys know what massacre I'm talking about. In Oklahoma, in Mr. Turner, is the early 20th century?
Yeah, I think
It's right there around the turn of the century. I think it's the early 20th century. There was a massacre of African Americans in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I believe it was I can't remember exactly the reaction to it. I think there was a factory got shut down. That's usually what causes it. And the white people in the city went to the black part of the city and basically just started killing people and burning it down. And it lasted for like 3 days where they continued killing people. And Ida Wells was one of the people who went there and actually started interviewing people and talking to whites and blacks to figure out what happened and trying to encourage black people to resist. And she was unsuccessful. She did a lot of chronicling of why black people were in that subservient position, why they weren't in a position to fight back, and what their frame of mind was. And so she did a lot for really sociology and psychology with talking to people there, and gives us real insight in what it was like to be in those stations.
Yeah. She also figured out the Memphis race rioting, which was pretty cool. Start over again.
Well, I mean, her whole focus was anti-lynching activism. And she focused a lot on the churches, actually. She'd go to the white churches and be like, hey, why are you allowing lynching? Why are you coming out against this? Like, it's pretty unchristian. And so she's really exposing a lot of the issues in the country. Mark, you?
Okay, but what's the surprise that we didn't know about a massacre like this in, like, US?
So the question that we often have is looking at what the mindset of African Americans who live in those communities was like. Yes, we know that they're browbeaten. We know that they live in fear, but she actually exposes a lot of just how they felt in that, who they put the blame on. There's a lot of really interesting things you can read about with that. So I really recommend reading her writing.
She's a brilliant writer. She's an absolutely brilliant writer. My problem with it is her conclusion is whites and blacks can't live together.
I like Malcolm X too. I didn't say that these are like the people who I think have the
No,
best
I know.
ideas.
I know, but so she believed.
She just did a lot for.
Well, she uncovered a lot, and she was an important voice for the African Americans. And she's the person challenging the American government to try and enforce laws and lynching. Right? She's amazingly brave, and she did a cop in the thigh one time. I mean, she was a tough individual. Her vision for America was that there would be 2 black states. There would be 2 African American states. So there would be 2 states that's where the African Americans all lived.
And you can see why she'd feel that way.
Oh, of course.
Like, she died in 1931. And so in that time period, looking at how Jim Crow had arisen, looking at how all the hope that came out of the end of the Civil War, 1865, and how all that had faded and the North had totally abandoned black people in the South during Reconstruction. You can see how you say, you know what, it's probably not going to work. And later on, later thinkers think that too, like Malcolm X. Yeah, take a donut, go for it. All right, Elizabeth I. I don't have a whole lot to say about Elizabeth except that to be not the first, but one of the first queens of England and kick so much butt. I mean, Elizabeth II named herself after Elizabeth I for a reason. Elizabeth was able to step into shoes that had been predominantly men's for a long time and fill them with gusto, to the point where she is not just the best queen that England has ever had, but she is in the ranking for the top monarch that England's ever had. She destroyed the Spanish Armada, although actually I think nature did a whole lot of that too. She presided over the destruction of the Spanish Armada, and the expansion and really creation of the British Empire comes from her. And her dad was Henry VIII, and surviving Henry VIII being around you for too long when you're a woman is pretty impeccable.
Well, she actually turned being a woman into an advantage, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
She's cool.
It takes a lot of political know-how and acumen to be able to do that. So you'll notice that a lot of my people have stuff in common where they're all either brilliant writers or brilliant politicians. All right, William Howard Taft is one I will defend to the death. Best president we've ever had.
Nicest
By president by far.
We've had a couple nice ones, but he's by far the nicest.
By far.
Wasn't he the one who got stuck in the bathtub?
He did not. That was a malicious lie. Never happened.
But he
you
was
know
really
what he
fat.
did do? He struggled with weight gain his whole life because he was a stress eater, which I really, I sympathize with as a stress eater myself. And his weight fluctuates by hundreds of pounds throughout. When he was president, he got to be really overweight because being president is stressful. But every day he's there working in the gym, like trying to work off some of it, and then just eating everything. And I get that. I get that. Two of my favorite stories about Taft. First, before he's president, he was governor of the Philippines. And when he first arrived, our military was decimating that place. Like the Filipino War is something we don't really learn about in the United States. But think of Vietnam and how nasty that was. And not extended, but like make it almost worse. I would argue being in the Philippines was worse than being in Vietnam. Vietnam, at least you sometimes had air conditioning you go back to sometimes. But our soldiers were getting really wrecked out there, and so the military's reaction was to just kill as many Filipinos as possible. It didn't matter whether they were civilians, combatants, or anything. Taft got there and saw what was happening and said, this is not the way. And he had to spend a lot of political power reining in the military. And they were resisting him very hugely, but fortunately he was popular enough as a politician that he was able to get it done. And he totally changed their approach to the Philippines. He turned it from being just violence over to being more about working with the culture, getting the people more involved in politics. Before that, Filipinos, none of them were allowed into the governor's mansion at all. And he started having parties where Filipinos were just allowed to just come in and dance and be part of it. He learned all the local dances and everything, got involved in the culture. There's actually a eyewitness accounts of when he was on the way back to the Philippines later on. He was like practicing the dances and make sure he still remembered them and everything. And the Filipino people loved him. And one thing that's really impressive about it is while he was there, he was offered this spot in the Supreme Court by, I think, McKinley at the time. Offered a spot in the Supreme Court, which was his dream. The number one thing he wanted in life was to be a Supreme Court justice. And he turned it down because he said, my job here isn't done. I need to keep helping these people. If I leave, the military is going to step back in. And then in the White House, Mr. Turner shared this story with me. There was a maid who worked in the White House, African-American woman. And she didn't have childcare for her daughter. So her daughter, her little daughter, how old was that, 6 years old?
5, I think, at the time.
Okay. Would come to work with her. And one day the maid was cleaning and everything, and she turned around, her daughter was gone. She was like, oh no. She's like wandered somewhere in the White House. And remember, this is like early 20th century. African-American girl walking around the White House could be a really disastrous situation. And so she goes tearing through the White House looking for her daughter. And she finally comes into the dining room. And her daughter is sitting at the big table with Taft. And they're both eating ice cream. And she comes running in and says, oh my God, Mr. President, I'm so sorry. Like, I'll take her right now. She will never do this again. You'll never see her again. I'm sorry. And he stopped her and he said, this is the best conversation that I have had since I've been in this chair. He really did not like being president. He thought it was stressful. The people were all backstabbers. He said, your daughter is an absolute delight. So, you are not allowed to punish her. And what's more, every Sunday at this time, she will be sitting here at this table having ice cream with me. And that's what he did. For the rest of his presidency, he sat there and ate ice cream with a little black girl, which was entirely unheard of at that time. I mean, think about this time period, before civil rights, before everything, before World War I even. Yeah.
Except that he removed a lot of black office holders in the South, and you didn't mention that, and also...
She's fact checking me over there.
Yeah, I'm fact checking you.
Well, he allowed it. He allowed it. I don't know that.
It says Taft followed through removing most black office holders in the South and made few appointments from that race in the North. This differed from Roosevelt's position, who would not remove or replace black office holders with whom white locals would not deal with.
And this is why Taft is usually not ranked in the top presidents, is because he was a compromiser in many ways. And that's, whereas Roosevelt was all about like burning down the bridges, setting up a new order, Taft thought that was unsustainable. And so he looked to
But it
actually,
was sustainable for Roosevelt in order to make the New Deal.
that's FDR, that's later.
Wrong Roosevelt.
Oh, what Roosevelt are we talking about here?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh, we're talking about Teddy?
Yeah.
Oh. I thought we were talking about.
The
If
Teddy
you're,
Myers.
gonna if you're gonna back check me, Mark, you should do it right. Anyway, Taft is often criticized, and Roosevelt criticized him a lot because he felt like he was betraying modern principles he set there. Taft believed that he had to make these compromises in order for all of it not to get overturned later. So he worked with the big businesses. He ended up shutting down more trusts than Roosevelt ever did. But in the end, he did leave them with some power more than Roosevelt wanted them to. And part of that also, some of the racial progress was being fought back against so much in the South that Taft did make those compromises. So yeah, that's why he's not usually put in the top presidents. Again, this is not authoritative list of the best people in history.
This
These
is
are
an opinion.
my favorites. All right. We're going to kind of zip through these last ones.
Oh my god.
You don't like Theodora?
Sure.
Theodora, you know, I like the powerful women who are actually running the state. Theodora was the wife of Justinian, who was...
Sorry.
Justinian was a mixed ruler in Byzantine Empire. In that he had some successes, but he also had a lot of personal failings, especially once he got the plague. Theodora, though, I admire her. She started her career as a prostitute, actually, and she actually managed to woo Justinian into marrying her, and continued to use that level of influence and power to influence policy. A huge amount of Byzantine policy came from her, not Justinian, but through Justinian from her, which is incredibly impressive. One of the most important things she did was there was a riot between two sports teams in Constantinople, where they were like killing all the politicians, throwing them out of their mansions and killing them, and they were coming for Justinian, and he was about to flee the city. And she stopped him and said, "No, if you leave, we're done for. We're going to stay and fight them." And they did, and they won. And that's the only reason that his emperorship did not end in an untimely manner right there. So again, someone, I can't speak for her moral aptitude, but she's impressive. An impressive person. Yeah, we can argue about that later. Two more. Alexander Hamilton, I don't think I need to talk a whole lot about him. I think we know him. Again, not for his moral courage or anything, but I think Alexander Hamilton probably has the most influence on our country and how it came to be. We look at the beginning of the country as a battle between Jefferson and Hamilton's visions, and in the end, Washington took Hamilton's ideas over Jefferson's almost every time, and we have him to thank for pretty much our entire economic and political system, which there are flaws, but just see you later. But Hamilton was really one of the major forces behind creating stability there. And lastly, my favorite, Cyrus the Great. Going back in time, Cyrus the Great, who created the Persian Empire, which is really one of the best empires. And his number one thing, I'm about to run out of time, so I'm going to just say one thing really here. He ended slavery in Persia back in the 6th century BC. Ending slavery in the 6th century is something really impressive, especially since the Persian order was entirely dependent on slavery. He made Zoroastrianism the religion that it was, and became the dominant religion in the region for another 1,000 years, really. And just completely created the culture of that area. So.
You didn't pick Darius?
Nah, Darius.
Yeah, Cyrus is better.
Cyrus is better.
But also Cyrus tried to kill one of his own sons.
I mean, that was
That's
pretty,
kind of a
that,
norm.
that was kind of the norm right there.
That's
If you look at the
that's
Ottomans,
not
He
about
ended the Babylonian
like with
captivity.
big wings, and he's like, oh god.
if you look at the Ottomans later on, when you became Ottoman Sultan, you
Yeah.
killed everyone in your family, like all your brothers, everyone. Sometimes your sisters. Originally, it was just your brothers, but eventually started adding sisters too, because you want to make sure no one would challenge you.
This
for
is
the
also
throne.
like the guy who had a son who died because the other son killed him, and then another guy who pretended to be his son came in, pretending to be the emperor, and
It's
then he got
basically that.
killed.
Yeah. If
Alright.
you've seen Stardust, it's that. It's where everyone kills each other and then one of them Sultan. It's pretty fun. All right, that's it. That's my top 10. If you have any questions about them, come see me. If you want to argue about any of them, I'm happy to anytime.
Do you know how Darius?
Especially if you're using Wikipedia.
Oh well, screw you. Wait, do you know how Darius became the emperor? Sorry,
Darius
yeah.
is the one who, he's the one who, who secretly killed the actual heir, isn't he?
I thought
Yeah.
it was because there was like the they at dawn they had to like whinny their horses, like you know what I mean?
Winnie, their horses?